And today we have a speaker who will be introduced in a few minutes, Melanie Goldberg, speaking on immigration. We're going to start with our purpose. So we'll say it together. The organized unit of women in faith shall be a community of women whose purpose is to know God and to experience freedom as whole persons through Jesus Christ, to develop a creative, supportive fellowship, and to expand concepts of mission through participation in the global ministries of the church. And Karen Britchford is going to come up and introduce our speaker.
As Bev has mentioned, our speaker today is Melanie Goldberg. I met Melanie, I think, first when we started, I joined the book group that's sponsored by the Justice for Our Neighbors group. So when someone thought they might, suggested that a speaker would be someone to talk about immigration, I thought of Melanie. So without further ado, here's Melanie.
Somebody's phone? Or are you, okay. Yeah, okay. Good morning. So I was just telling our friend here that I have a dog at home, and he's 13 and a half now, and so just as happens in older humans, he starts getting up earlier and earlier in the morning and forgetting what night and day is, and so so that's where I'm coming from. He woke me up barking at 6 o'clock this morning. So anyway, yes, I'm Melanie Goldberg. I've been practicing immigration law in the Detroit area for more than 25 years now. 8 of those years I was working with Justice for Our Neighbors. I still do a little support for them on a contract basis, but I do some immigration on my own. I've also, during the pandemic, just kind of really flipped my life on its head, and so I've been doing, I have also a master's degree in teaching, so I picked up some tutoring and childcare, and so I'm doing some of that. I'm working with the Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, which is where I belong, and expanding my role there. I got certified as a yoga instructor during the pandemic, so I used my time wisely. I also was just prior to that ordained as an interfaith minister, so started building my business of doing weddings and funerals. And so all of those things wrapped up together now fill my life. And I have 2 daughters, 24 and 29, who are on their own now, so not needing me. It's just me and the dog at home. So here we are to speak about immigration, and hopefully I'll be able to teach you something, maybe something you didn't know, maybe something you thought you knew, maybe dispelling some myths, and that's always a good thing. And what you take from today, feel free to share with your friends and neighbors when you have a discussion or when they mention something and say, you know, I heard, and I have been, like I said, practicing for 25 years in the immigration courts, in the USCIS. I've seen lots of changes and hopefully made life better for the people that I was helping, who were my clients. Oops. Oh, I have to turn it on. That's right. There you go. So that was my welcome, and everybody has a story. Unless you are 100% Native American, your family came from somewhere else, no matter how many hundreds of years ago. Everybody came for the same reasons that they still come today, to reunite with family, to feed and financially support their families, to flee a bad situation out of fear, to seek freedom and safety, and to be able to pursue their faith freely. So we have, every immigration situation does have a push and pull factor. So you're either being pushed out of your home country or a reason to be pulled into the United States. So why this Irish family looks like, I still say that that guy, that tall man looks like Bill Clinton, but they are, so this is a family, looks like an Irish family, and they most likely came to the United States so that they could feed and support their family due to, could be the the potato famine, or some other financial or social crisis in their country. History repeats itself, and that's one of the things wrong with history. And we see time and again how immigration has its waves where we welcome immigrants and waves where we don't. We have been in a very long wave of not welcoming immigrants into the United States. But in 1776, naturalization was allowed. That was when the law of naturalization, which means the procedure to become a U.S. citizen. Free white people of good character could become U.S. citizens after having lived in the United States for 2 years. That's changed. You have to have lived here for 5 years now, but we'll get to that later. In 1880, Chinese Exclusion Act, first American history to place a broad restriction on one ethnic group. And what happened here, and this is where history repeats itself, is at the time, these people, there were boatloads of Chinese coming from China to the west coast of America. And when they got to San Francisco, they said, sorry, we now have an act excluding you. And so they had to put them on the boat and turn them back to China. Even those who had been here before, there are some famous cases in the Supreme Court, but Chinese who had been in the United States took that long boat journey back home to visit family and then were coming back here, and they were turned away because we now had a Chinese Exclusion Act. Well, the railroads were done. We didn't need them anymore, so send them home. Well, the same thing happened, if you remember, when our last president took office and put a Muslim ban on. There were people in the air flying to the United States, and they got to the airports, and what happened? Sorry, people from your country are not welcome here anymore. Put them on the plane and send them home. So history repeats itself. These are just some of the highlights of immigration acts through history. We had, in 1891, we were barring polygamists, the sick or diseased. In 1907, there was a restriction on Japanese immigrants. In 1917, World War I created xenophobia. Immigration from most Asian countries was halted. In 1924, there was an act that favored immigrants from Northern and Western European countries, but immigration from Southern, Central, and Eastern Europe was limited, including Italy, because, darker skins, right? So I was at a moth-like storytelling event where this gentleman, and all the stories were based on immigration. So this gentleman, he was maybe my age, and he grew up, and as he decided, he had an Italian background, and he decided that after he retired, he was going to go for an extended trip to southern Italy, where his family was from. And he went to the village where his grandmother had come from. And he said it was just so idyllic. He said it was beautiful, and people would get up in the morning and go to the piazza and have coffee and sit around and talk, and then they'd go back and toil around in their homes and then come back in the evening and have wine, and and he said it was such a wonderful lifestyle, and he wondered why his grandmother hadn't ever shared this with him, why she never took him for trips to visit her family in Italy. Well, a couple of years after that, he went to the Tenement Museum in New York. which I highly recommend if you're ever in New York and looking for something interesting to do. He went to the Tenement Museum and he heard a story about how Italians, during this certain period, there was such a quota on people from that country, they couldn't come in. They couldn't come in legally. So what happens when you can't come into the country legally? You come in illegally. And so those people who had come in like that could not go back to their home country to visit because they would not be able to return to the United States. So that triggered something in his mind. He said, my goodness, my grandmother could not go back to her home country because she came here during this period of time and likely did not have the proper paperwork. And so then he had a renewed sense of empathy for people who are doing that now because our quotas are so low and not meeting the needs of our employers and our families now. So that's when illegal immigration increases. The stricter the quotas, the more illegal immigrants are here. 1942, we did have labor shortages, so during these periods of labor shortages, we do welcome Mexican agricultural workers. And then the exclusion of Asian immigration ends in 52. We bring in 60 to 62, we bring in many unaccompanied Cuban children. 65, the quota system is replaced with preference categories, which I will show you in a little while what a mess that is. And in 86 was the Reagan amnesty, and that is the last time that there has been such a program of allowing people who have lived in the United States for so many years and been working and paying taxes to allow them to apply for some kind of permanent status. In 96, Clinton signed the illegal immigrant and refugee and, I don't know, IRA we call it. It's a long name, and it's a bad law, and ADEPA. So those were said to be the most draconian immigration acts in the U.S. ever. And again, I will explain how those really hurt the chances and increased the undocumented population in the United States. And in 2001, the first DREAM Act was introduced by Durbin and Hatch, and we are still waiting on this, and the only thing that Obama could do during his years was an executive action, DACA, which continues today despite many attempts to overturn it in the courts. There has been no meaningful reform in either direction for the last few administrations, leaving us with this scene. So who lives in the United States? We have U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, also called green card holders, refugees and asylees, people with temporary protected status. Temporary protected status is conferred on to citizens of certain countries where there's either a civil war or a human or a natural disaster. So Haiti after many hurricanes, and Syria, Yemen after civil wars, and some other countries, Syria, and I don't know who else is on the list currently, but the administration says we will confer temporary protected status on you. So no matter if you have a legal status or not, maybe you came with a visa and stayed longer than you were supposed to, maybe you came without papers, that all doesn't matter. We will give you this temporary protected status for usually 18 months, 2 years at a time. During that time, you can apply to be able to work legally, and you can stay here. Well, sometimes temporary protected status lasts for decades, as it did for the El Salvadorans, and people are here for 25 years, and their children are raised here, and they buy homes, and they have businesses, and then temporary is temporary. So when do you decide that the conditions back in the home country are good enough that these people should be able to go back home? And what do you do with those who have made their lives here? So it is a safe haven. It is good in some ways, but it needs to. So then it's revisited every 18 months to 2 years and decided if it should continue. And then there's deferred action, DACA. The problem with DACA is what the application stood for was Deferred Action of Childhood Arrivals. So yes, it was a good thing because those children who were brought here as as babies by their parents through they had no say in the matter. They came and, with DACA, they were able to apply for employment authorization so they could work and permission to stay in 2-year increments. Well, DACA stands for deferred action. What's the action that's being deferred? The action that's being deferred is deportation. So this application actually is a way for people to say, here I am, I'm deportable, but defer that action. Please don't deport me and give me 2 years permission to stay here, which has now been renewed for a number of 2-year increments. So, so is that a good thing? I would counsel people when they would come to me, listen, you are really outing yourself and your family. So if nobody knows you're here, they're going to know you're here after you file this application. Do you really want to file it? And they were just in such dire straits that, yes, they wanted to be able to continue their education after high school. They wanted to be able to work to help support their families. So, yes, they applied for it. And then we have students and temporary workers and other people here on temporary visas, visitors, and the like. And we have the undocumented. So whether you're a non-immigrant or an immigrant, there's 2 categories which are very important to know. A non-immigrant is somebody who comes here for a temporary purpose, for a specific purpose, temporarily, a specific amount of time, and then they go home. So immigrant, that's somebody who intends to come here permanently and make their life here and maybe one day become a citizen. So here's our alphabet soup of non-immigrants. Here we have diplomats, visitors. So visitor is the B1, B2, people coming here to go to Disneyland with their families. The other important ones, F, are students. H, H1B, there's more H's. There's H2A, H2B, H1B. So the H2A and H2B, those are the people who are up working in the resorts in Mackinac Island and other types of resort places, and agricultural workers, and the horse people working in the horse barns. They're here on H2A, and those are very limited. They can come for 9 months at a time, and the numbers of those visas are so small that they are gone in an instant each year. H1B, they also don't have enough numbers. Those are people who are working in IT, computer industries, engineers, and the like. And those numbers that's a lottery. It's literally now called a lottery because the numbers are so few for those visas. And employers have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars for each visa. There's all kinds of fees tacked onto it. J, exchange students, those are often au pairs come on J visas. Young people who work in the summer camps from other countries, they come on J visas. Residents, medical residents, doctors working in the hospitals, they are on J visas. And some of those J visas require them, because they are supported by their home country and by the United States financially, they are required then to go back to their home country and share their knowledge for 2 years before they ever return to the United States. There are some exceptions to that, of course. And then K is a fiancé. The fiancé comes to the United States. It's a temporary visa until she or he marries the person that they came to, who sponsored them. And that marriage has to happen within 90 days of entering the United States, and then they can file for their green card. Who else? Performers. That's pretty much what I'm doing now. I do like folk bands that come to perform for culturally unique events, like Hungarian. There's a group of Hungarians here in Michigan, Hungarian Americans, and they put on a summer camp every summer and bring in a band from Hungary. And so I just was working on that visa package for them. And then we have S, the snitch, so somebody who helps the U.S. government or some other police entity. Usually the snitch has to do with trafficking, and it's usually the federal government that they're helping. Then there's the victims of trafficking, victims of violence, and so these are the metropolitan areas. This map is from 2017, but currently it's pretty much the same. This is where we have the highest concentration of immigrants. And then this map is interesting. So it does not count Mexico, but what it shows, I can't move because then you can't hear me, but hold up. So what it shows you is the countries that have where the most immigrants were born in those states. So all those light blue, they're all India. And I think the yellow is Canada. And I can't see the rest from here. So that is, of course, Mexico is the highest number in, I think, 30, more than half of the states have Mexico as the highest number. So they didn't even count Mexico in this, but this is just other than Mexico. Yeah. Well, it's on it's west, and Philippines is west, but yeah. Yep. So. Always looking for interesting tidbits to add. In Michigan, we have about 7.1% of the population that was born outside the United States. And these numbers are as of 2018, which was the most recent that I could find. More than half of them have been naturalized and are now U.S. citizens. And the top countries were Mexico, India, as we saw on that map, Iraq, China and Canada, Lebanon and Korea. So those are who you will find the most. 100,000 undocumented, according to a 2016 report. But as I say, they are undocumented, so it's hard to have accurate numbers because we don't know. Approximately 72,000 U.S. citizens in Michigan live with at least one undocumented family member. Undocumented immigrants pay an estimated $317 million in federal taxes and $143 million in state and local taxes, and that's just Michigan, the ones in Michigan. Immigrant-led households in Michigan paid $5 billion in federal taxes and $2 billion. So that's immigrant-led households altogether, undocumented, documented. So we need our immigrants. Families wait years to be reunited. And so I want to go back here because when we talk about, well, they're not paying taxes, they all get paid under the table. This is not true. Even somebody who gets paid under the table is paying, when they rent a room in a house, portion of that is property taxes. When they buy gas, they're paying gas tax. When they shop in the stores to buy clothing or whatever they buy. They're paying sales tax. So we have all of these other taxes. And often they use what ITINs, which is an individual taxpayer ID number. And those look like Social Security numbers. They're issued by the IRS the same way. And it's a way for somebody who doesn't have a Social Security number to be able to file a tax return or pay taxes. Well, employers will use that ITIN to withhold taxes, but these people never are going to file taxes. They're never going to get any refunds. So their money sits there. The Social Security money that was withheld from their paycheck, they're never going to use it. They're never going to have the opportunity to use it. And so it goes to benefit our system. And studies have been shown that without that money going into the system, it would be broke already, which it's not looking too good now already. So immigrating is not easy. People wait years to be reunited with their families. Then there's few visas for low-skill workers, like I mentioned before. The agricultural workers, immigration is expensive, and some people just can't afford the fees. And on top of that, if you have to hire a private attorney, then, the fees when I started, and I can't remember, I should look up somewhere so I have an exact number, but for an immigrant somebody who came here as a student, let's say, and then they met somebody, fell in love, a U.S. citizen, and they got married, and they want to file the green card application for the non-U.S. citizen. It used to cost $500 maybe. Now it's well over $2,000 for all the paperwork to be filed. And then if you have to pay another $2,000 or more, depending on who the attorney is, I know I'm very low bono, but yeah, so, filing fees, attorney fees can be $2,000 to $5,000, and so that's a lot of money. And if you're a young couple starting out, it's a huge investment. So here are the roads to legal permanent residence, or the legal green card: employment, family, asylum, a refugee, and the diversity visa. And why don't they get in line? Because this is the roadmap to get your green card. Lots of roadblocks, lots of twists and turns, lots of hurdles and hoops to jump through. So family-based immigration, which a prior administration liked to call chain migration, and didn't like so much, I think, because so many of his wife's family members were coming in that way. There's the immediate relative, which is the spouse and minor children and parents of the U.S. citizen, and this is the preference categories I mentioned earlier. So we have family-based first preference, family-based second preference, family-based third preference, and fourth preference. And the same happens in employment. You have the extraordinary ability alien, who is kind of like the immediate relative. They don't have a preference category. And then there's employment-based first preference, second preference, third preference, fourth preference. And processing times are up, and I'll show you how those preferences, I think in the next slide, we'll see how that happens. So right now, U.S. immigration application backlog has tripled since 2014. It was 3.2 million in 2014. There's 8.6 million applications in the backlog now. The highest fees ever paid, and now there's also a published notice in the Federal Register requesting higher fees even yet. And they said, well, with the higher fees, we're going to improve services. Well, the last time they raised the fees, the services got worse. U.S. citizen spouse who files for a green card is waiting for 15 months now. An employer who's waiting for their employee's green card is waiting almost 2 years. Somebody who files an application for citizenship or naturalization is waiting for well over a year. And a victim of crime, that's somebody who's been, maybe working in a Subway restaurant and gets held up and cooperates with the police to to find that person and, in the investigation. They can apply for a visa called the U visa for victims of crime. But they are waiting for 60 months for their determination, and there's no possibility of work authorization during most of that time. So how long do they wait? Well, this is the chart. So if you notice on the left-hand side of the chart, those are the family-based preferences that I talked about. The immediate relatives, the spouses and parents of a U.S. citizen and minor children of a U.S. citizen, they're not on this chart because all they have to do is wait for the time that their application gets processed. The rest of the people, they have to file the first part of their application, which gives them a priority date. And as you see the dates here, these are the priority dates. So they can only apply for usually their admission as a legal permanent resident at the U.S. consulate once their priority date comes to the front of the line and is published in this document, which is the Visa Bulletin, which is issued by the Department of State every month. So as you can see, the family-based fourth preference for a U.S. citizen who wants to petition for their Mexican brother or sister is waiting. Those who filed their application in August of 2000 have just come to the front of the line. So that's 23 years. But these months do not march like the months in the calendar. They march about 50% slower. So if somebody who had just, a Mexican who had just become naturalized U.S. citizen and says, I want to petition for my brothers and sisters now that I'm a citizen, comes to me, I'm going to tell him not that it's 23 years, but that it's more like 33 years before his family will be able to immigrate based on the petition that he filed for them. The C's on the F2A, those are spouses and minor children of legal permanent residents. So those are people who have green cards and bring their spouse to the United States. The C means it's current. They don't have a date that they have to wait for to show up on this chart. So, and you can see many of the others are also very, the adult married children of Mexican, November 1997. So only those who filed their petitions for their adult children to be able to immigrate to the United States in November of 1997, they are the ones who are eligible to come and continue their processing. So we do need immigrants. These are some of the companies that were founded by immigrants and children of immigrants. And I think most of you are probably using most of those at some time in your life. So after 9/11, what we had before was the Immigration and Naturalization Service, which we all knew as the INS. All right, so 9/11 happens and the administration decides that we need the Department of Homeland Security. And under the Department of Homeland Security, we're going to break up INS into USCIS, Immigration and Custom Enforcement, and Customs and Border Patrol. I thought that makes sense, actually, because under INS, we had both the people who were trying to deport people and the agent. So it was one agency that was two-faced. They were trying to deport people. At the same time, they were welcoming people and adjudicating their applications, which allowed them to stay. Well, the only problem with separating them into 3 agencies, even though they're under one big umbrella, is that they don't talk to each other. So there was a definite communication problem between 3. It's getting a little better, but when you had to work between 2 agencies, sometimes I felt like they were putting a file on a slow-moving turtle to take it down Jefferson Avenue to the other office. So and then other departments we work with, the Immigration Court and Board of Immigration Appeals is under the Department of Justice, and then the Department of State is the consulate. So USCIS, they adjudicate applications for permission, to ask for permission to enter to the United States. So all permanent residence starts here. Most temporary entrants begin here. They adjudicate asylum applications. They adjudicate applications for citizenship. And then we have Customs and Border Patrol, the gatekeepers. They are the third and final line of inquiry as to entry into the U.S. of people and goods. They are at the land borders, the water borders, the airports. Their jurisdiction is 100 miles from any international border. And guess what? That means all of Michigan, except for maybe a tiny sliver in the middle of the state. But because the lakes are all connected, and even if one lake had a border with Canada, so it looks like Lake Michigan doesn't have an international border because the other side of that is Wisconsin and Illinois. But because it's connected to Superior and Huron, which do have borders with Canada, they're all considered, and so we get the whole state of Michigan. Just like Maine is also the ones up in the northeast tip. ICE, I call those the innkeepers and travel agents. They're the ones who arrest immigrants who have violated their status. They have the attorneys who represent the government in deportation hearings. They detain immigrants during removal proceedings, and that's where the innkeeper comes from. And they communicate with other countries to arrange for the acceptance of their national and accompany them during removal, and that's the travel agent part. Detention is not used as egregiously now as it has during the past administrations. Their bed quota has gone down, and the money spent has gone down, but it's still significant. More use of alternative to detention, which are the ankle bracelets and different tracking devices and monitoring and phone calls and those kinds of things. The average stay for a detained person is 55 days. The Supreme Court ruled last year that there is no right to a bond hearing, meaning that anybody could be held indefinitely. And 75% of those detained are detained in privately owned facilities, which we don't have in Michigan really for immigrants. Our immigrants are detained in county jails. Monroe County Jail, Calhoun County Jail, and up in the Sioux at Chippewa County Jail. So this is just kind of a rundown that shows you through the years how many beds, what the quota was for beds, and how much was being spent. And so now we are the lowest it has been since 2010, both in bed numbers and money being spent. The highest, of course, was in 2018, where actually, even though the bed quota was 40,000, there were typically 50,000 detainees in jail. So people can be deported from the U.S. if they violate an immigration or a criminal law, and for the criminal law, well, either. Even if they are in the U.S. legally, they can be deported anytime before they would become a U.S. citizen. Once they're a U.S. citizen, they're pretty safe. Unless they lied to become a U.S. citizen, that would be the one exception. Before 1986, the number of deportations rarely exceeded 2,000 a year, and during the Obama years, there were up to 400,000. And these numbers are really hard to track because different administrations count deportations differently. So those people who are bounced back at the border, some administrations count those as deportations, some don't. And so the numbers are really kind of inflated and deflated, but they give you a little sense of what we've been doing. So in 2022, ICE deported 72,000 and 1 million were expelled by Customs and Border Patrol at the southern border. Title 42 is the health concern COVID Act. And so 2.3 million people were intercepted at the border and 1 million were sent back. So asylum applicants wait. 788,000 pending applications in immigration court. And this is just pending applications for asylum. And there's another 800,000 pending with the USCIS. So in immigration court, there are several forms of relief from deportation that can be applied for. So the 788,000 are only the asylum applications. Asylum applicants are coming from 219 countries, speak 418 different languages. 3 out of 10 are children under the age of 18, and the average wait time is 4.3 years. But I know people who are waiting. Some of the lists that I belong to show that attorneys have clients who've been waiting 6 years or more. The leading countries are Guatemala, Venezuela, Cuba, and Brazil. They can only apply for permission to work 5 months after filing an asylum application. But the application for employment authorization does take 4 to 6 months to be processed, so it could be a year before they can have permission to work legally. So I want to mention also, so because of the situation in the Ukraine, the administration was able to come up with a procedure where and I was just listening on NPR on the way in to a gentleman who participated in this procedure where you can go onto this clearinghouse website and agree to sponsor a person or a family who wants to come to the United States. And so this is kind of working in and through the refugee and asylee process. So they're not really a refugee, they're not really an asylee yet unless they decide to apply for asylum once they get here. But they are kind of allowed to come in, paroled into the United States with the help of this sponsoring family or person who agrees to help them get set up in a household and help them. So this gentleman, he said the family stayed with him he and his wife for a couple of months while they were getting situated and got a job and were able to get an apartment and help the son get enrolled in school and those kinds of things. And so I believe that has been expanded to other countries, Venezuela, I think. And other than that, I'm not sure. But it's something that can be used, and there's a limited number of people who can take advantage of this new program. And it was successful for the Ukrainian situation. So I do believe that the administration may try to expand that. So there is a difference between refugees and asylees. A refugee is determined outside the United States by a body through the UN, UN High Commission on Refugees. They go to different places where people are fleeing to, so the third country. if somebody, from Syria flees to Turkey, and then the UNHCR will have a place where they interview people there. Sometimes there are camps where refugees are living, and the UN will go there and determine. And once somebody is determined as a refugee, I'll tell you what happens then. An asylee is in the United States and has a fear of persecution if they return to their home country. So refugees and asylees are based on the same body of law. They have a fear of persecution on account of political opinion, religion, ethnicity, race, or membership in a social group, which is very hard to define. So primarily we see people, political opinion and religion, ethnicity, and race. Those are the more clear-cut cases. So the UN determines whether an individual is a refugee. They go through numerous screenings, medical screenings, criminal screenings through Interpol and CIA and all FBI and all the international ones. They're fingerprinted, they have DNA, and the DNA tests are because somebody will say, oh, this is my child, so that the child can leave with them, but the child is not their child, and other things like that. Background checks, 8 or more institutions. This can all take, it says here 18 months or more, but more like a couple of years. Once they're approved, they're told where they will be settled. They don't have a choice in the matter. They will try to resettle them in a place where there is a community of people from their country. So, and maybe if they do have family in another country, they will try. But there's no, basically when they are assigned, so they're assigned to whatever country, Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Germany, United States. And then once assigned to that country, they are assigned to a community to go live in. And it's based on which organization that's been sanctioned by the government to handle refugees, or like Samaritas here, which organization in which city in the United States has capacity to assist another family. So there are a number of issues that determine where they're going to go. They sell their belongings and prepare to travel, and then additional screening upon their arrival to the United States. And then the resettlement agencies help with housing, furnishings, and food. It's paid from a one-time payment of $1,000. The work authorization is actually they're authorized to work as refugees once they enter the United States. They often do just want the card so they have proof, but they don't really need that. They're expected to become self-sufficient in 90 days. A lot of these people come, they don't speak English, they have kids, they have to learn how to drive, they have to get a job, they have to find a place to live. The agencies help them with that, but 90 days and $1,000 doesn't go very far. After 6 months, they must begin paying back their resettlement airfare costs, and after 1 year, they have to apply for a green card. Whereas an asylee doesn't have to apply for a green card after they've been granted asylum 1 year later, but the refugee has to. And the application for a green card, in their case, there's no cost. Currently, the new published, so they're talking about adding fees for that. Anyway, refugee statistics. These are how many refugees the United States has accepted over the past 30 years, which really, I mean, if you look at countries like Germany, that's the size of Texas, that accepts 1 million refugees, and look how big we are. And these are the numbers of refugees that we've accepted. There's 32 million refugees worldwide. And as of 2019, only 0.5% of them have been resettled anywhere. In 2020, these were the top countries where we received refugees from. The current backlog of pending cases in immigration court, moving to another subject, we're up to 2 million plus pending cases in immigration court. So these are people that the government has decided need to not be in the United States. These are people that Customs and Border Patrol has intercepted and put into detention. These are people that INS officer, or not INS, ICE officers have intercepted somewhere in the country and decided that they need to be deported. These are people, some of them who have committed criminal acts, but most of them not. So why this? Because Customs and Border Patrol and ICE get the lion's share of funding, and the immigration court system does not get the funding to keep up with the robust activity of Customs and Border Patrol and ICE. So now I'm seeing so I'm on all of these email lists, and one list is just saying that the ICE attorneys, the government attorneys, are just sending notices to the court for cases that they have very little interest in because maybe the person, they didn't commit a crime. They just kind of got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time without the right papers, without any papers. And so there's no real interest in deporting them, that the attorneys are just not showing up to court, the government attorneys. And they're sending those notices to the private attorneys saying, you know what, we're not going to show up. And so now we don't know what's going to happen with that. Does the judge just dismiss the case because there's a, quote, failure to prosecute? I don't know. But the ICE attorneys can't keep up with this. The judges can't keep up with this. It's a nightmare. And the numbers keep going up. I mean, last time I gave this presentation was just prior to the pandemic. 3 years ago, we were at 1 million. Now we're at 2 million. So what was the big problem and what caused all the undocumented, the numbers of undocumented to increase like they have? Well, this was the act that was signed by President Clinton as he was walking out the door in 1996. It was the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. Like I said, we call it IRA. So what this act did was, prior to this, and this happened just as I was starting to practice immigration law, and I went to that first conference, and all the attorneys were going, oh my gosh, and I had no idea what it had meant. Well, there had been a part of the law that allowed people who somebody came across the border illegally, or somebody came legally and stayed longer than they were supposed to, and then they had the possibility of applying for a green card, either through an employer or through some family member. They could pay a $1,000 penalty, file their paperwork, not have to leave the country, and everybody was happy. They could stay working. They could, they pay the $1,000 penalty because immigration law is administrative law. It's not criminal law. So this is like easy, a fine to pay, and then they can get their papers and they're legal. And then they become U.S. citizens and they're tax-paying members of the community, and families are kept together and employers don't lose their employees. Well, this took that away. And when it took it away, it meant that those people who now were going to have an opportunity to apply for a green card had to go outside the United States to the consulate to do it. But once they left the United States, they couldn't come back for 3 years or 10 years because because of the bar. So if they had been in the U.S. for 6 months to a year without proper papers or permission to be here, then that would be a 3-year bar. If they had been a year or more without the proper paperwork, that's a 10-year bar. If they had entered the United States without proper paperwork over a border, crossed the border illegally, that's a 10-year bar. If they had done that and stayed here for a year, left to go visit a dying family member, come back again without the proper paperwork, that's a permanent bar. So for the 3 and 10-year bar, there are waivers that can be filed, but they're very hard to get and very time-consuming and take years to be approved. And for that permanent bar, there are no such waivers. So what this act also did was increase Border Patrol at the southern border, gave more resources to the southern border, made it more dangerous to cross the border in the first place. So whereas prior to this act, in my mind, there was a revolving door. We would have people come in to work during certain agricultural seasons, and they would come in and they would go back home, and then they would come in and work and go back home, and no harm, no foul. After this was signed, that became a one-way track because people were afraid. It was dangerous to cross that border. Once you left, you might not ever be able to come back. NAFTA had something to do with the fact that there was a lack of work south of the border. People had to come here to be able to support their families, and once they came, they had to stay. And so that's really when the number of undocumented increased, was after the signing and enactment of this law. So this is just, as you can see, and no surprise, the primary number of undocumented come from Mexico, and then El Salvador and Guatemala. But actually the growing number of, this is the actual number, but when you look at the increase in number, the higher increases in number are actually coming from Asia and India, to be exact. A lot of students come here and don't leave, or they come on a visa and they don't go back. But as visas get harder to get for employers to bring employees from other countries, we have lots of employers setting up workshops outside the United States. For instance, Microsoft built a workshop or built a work site in Vancouver because they couldn't bring enough of these highly skilled workers into the United States to work to satisfy their needs, but they could get them to Canada. So who benefits? Canada. They get the tax dollars, they get the people spending money, they get, all of the things that come with having an increased population and an increased workforce. Same thing, middle-sized companies here in the Detroit area who can't get enough workers to fill their needs, set up work sites in Windsor because they can get them to Canada. So that's another deficit for the United States, and that shouldn't happen. We should be able to bring in all the workers that we need. So, and then the surprising story that I found was about the Irish. So there is a way that people from 30-some different countries, just like we, can go to their country without getting a visa prior to traveling, but once you get to the border, you get to the airport, they stamp you in for 90 days as a visitor, right? So we have a similar thing for people from certain countries, mostly northern and Western Europe. They come into the United States as they call it a visa waiver, and they can stay for 90 days. Well, a lot of people come on the visa waiver and decide they're having too much fun and they don't want to leave. So these Irish had done that. Well, they said, we're they're feeling like so many other people. They came out on the visa waivers, they found a job in a bar, they stayed, they're in New York, they had lots of friends, what are we going to do? And now they realize they can't go home. Because if they go home, they can't come back, and they really want to be able to come back or stay in the United States. So they said, please, Congress, do something. Help us. There's 50,000 undocumented Irish, so it's not all just from south of the border in Asia. So nothing was done for them special. So these are just some points on how to talk about immigration, and hopefully I gave you some good facts that you can share to dispel some myths. You always want to focus on the facts and the shared values. So focus on treating people with kindness and dignity versus statements that everyone has the right to be treated as a certain way. So we're all humans, and we all, every person who came to the United States from another country, like I said, all of us, our ancestors came from other countries, all came, whether they came, well, even today, whether somebody is coming here on a work visa legally or coming the way that they shouldn't come, everybody is seeking a better life and the opportunity to build a better life for themselves and their family. And that's the bottom line, and everybody has the right to do so. So here are a few resources that I used in putting this together, and if you like doing your own little research, I highly recommend. There are also, if you go to the bottom one, AILA.org, there's an advocacy tab, and on that advocacy tab, you'll find a Take Action, which is a letter that's already written for you. You just put in your name and your address, and if there's an issue that, number one, just by reading that statement, you will learn about another issue. And number two, if you're so moved, send a letter to your representative and senator on that issue through that Take Action tab. It makes a difference. Every year in April, the American Immigration Lawyers Association sponsors a National Day of Action. I've participated in that probably for the last 10 years. And we go to Washington, D.C. The last few years have been on Zoom, but this year we're going in person again, and I look forward to it every year. It's the day when we get to go visit our representatives and their aides in their offices and talk to them about the importance of really establishing good immigration laws. Yes, there need to be laws and there need to be restrictions. I am not saying that the borders should be open for everybody, but there need to be ample quotas and ample ways to bring people in to satisfy family needs and work needs. So as John F. Kennedy said, immigration policy should be generous, it should be fair, it should be flexible. With such a policy, we can turn to the world and to our own past with clean hands and a clear conscience. And even after all these years, this still makes sense. And so that's me. If you have another group who would like to hear about be educated on the issues, I'm always happy to talk. If you have another group who would like a yoga session, I can do that too. So any questions? Do we have time for questions and answers? Yes. Right. So a green card is given if a person is married to a U.S. citizen and gets their green card that way, and they've been married for less than 2 years, their initial green card is only good for 2 years. And it's called a conditional green card. In 2 years, they need to apply to remove those conditions. Then the green card they receive is a 10-year green card. Anybody else who applies for a green card gets that 10-year green card. Their legal permanent status does not end, but the card has an expiration date. And it used to be, back in the day, there were no expiration dates on those cards, but people were selling those cards and then saying, oh, I lost my card, and getting a new one. So now they have expiration dates only for that security measure. The status does not end, only the card expires and they have to apply for a new card. After 5 years of having that green card, they can apply for U.S. citizenship, which is often what we recommend because the cost of applying for a new green card and the cost of applying for citizenship are not that different. The only reason that somebody, and sometimes I'm counseling people that maybe they don't want to become a U.S. citizen. Maybe they got their green card later in life, and they're thinking that, in the end, they don't really want to stay here during retirement. They'll have a better life back in their home country after they retire because of socialized medicine and all the things that other countries do better than we do. And so they may decide to not become a citizen, because once you become a citizen, you are liable to pay taxes, U.S. taxes, on your worldwide income, no matter where you're living. So for some people, it doesn't make sense to do that. For others, they're just so happy to be here and be called an American that they want to. Yes? The question is it easier to come into the United States as a refugee than an immigrant? No. As you saw, the number of people who actually have been approved as refugees is like 0.5% of all the refugees around, and that can take years. It might be your only option, but if you do have another option, that's usually the better way to go. If you have family members, some of those family members that we talked about who can sponsor you, that might be a better way to go. It's hard to say, but refugee is a hard way to go because you've left your home country, you're in some third country, you're treated maybe not so well in that country either, and you have to jump through all those hoops before you can come to the United States. So. Okay, thank you so much.
That was really interesting and informative, and we appreciate you coming and sharing your wealth of information with us. Now we're going to have Suzanne come up, and she has a prayer for immigration, or about immigration. She's going to share with us.
Good morning. Am I close enough? There we go. This prayer comes from a friend I haven't met yet. And his name is Father Dan Hartnett. And we can close our eyes and for a moment. God of love and compassion, may we always recognize your spirit in the refugee family seeking safety from violence, in the migrant worker bringing food to our tables, in the asylum seekers seeking justice for their families, in the unaccompanied child traveling in a dangerous world. Give us hearts that break open whenever our brothers and sisters turn to us. Give us hearts that no longer turn deaf to their voices in time of need. Give us eyes to recognize a moment for grace instead of a threat. Give us voices that fail to remain silent, but which decide instead to advocate prophetically. Give us hands that reach out in welcome, but also in work for a world of justice until all homelands are safe and secure. Bless us, O Lord. Amen.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Connie Lawson, do you have anything from minutes or notes you need to bring up? We can't hear you. Yeah, yeah. Okay. I can't repeat what you said. I couldn't hear it all, but yeah, you could come up because so we can all hear. Okay. It's okay. Connie Lawson.
Connie Lawson. We had a meeting at Kathy Quapich's house on the 20th of January. It was good. That's when we decided, or I think we decided, to have this meeting today. But also we got together and did a project that Kathy came up with. It was very nice. We made crowns. I still have my crown. But also, we had picked stars. They're star words? Ah, okay, star words. Mine said rest. Unfortunately, I've been doing a lot of that. I find myself sleeping in the middle of the day with everything that's going on. I think I need one that says energy. And also, maybe what to look forward to and what to, let's say, not pat ourselves on the back, but realize that we have gifts that maybe that are good, that are things that maybe we don't recognize as gifts. That's it.
Thank you. And Barb has our treasurer report.
I don't have anything to hand out to you, but if you're interested, you can contact me and I can give you a spreadsheet with details on it. Our current checking balance is just under $3,000. Our savings balance is just over $1,300. In the past 6 months or so, I've paid out $150 to four different charities: the Methodist Children's Home, Cass Community Services, Motor City Wesley, and the UMRC Foundation, which is the Chelsea Retirement Center. We also spent a little over $150 on third grade Bibles this year, and $100 in speakers fees, which includes our speaker for today. And I say fee, it's not a fee, it's an honorarium. Income was better than we expected. We actually got $911 in November from the rummage sale. So this year, when it's time to sign up for the rummage sale, it's well, you can have your money, your portion of the proceeds go anywhere. And I know the building has lots of needs, but UWF, I'll get it right, doesn't have income coming in like it did before when we did the rummage sale all by ourselves. So think about specifying our organization. A lot of our income comes from dues. And with the dues, there is no set amount that you're supposed to give. Bev and I attended a district meeting. Karen was there too, virtually. And we were a little surprised that we have so little money and give so little money compared to the other churches in our the other UWF groups of churches in our area. Part of that, I know there are some churches that give a set amount for what you're supposed to give for dues. Also, we're really small. Bev said, look at Birmingham First. Well, Birmingham First is huge. And they do a huge rummage sale with designer purses, and there's no way we can compete with them. Some of the inner city churches actually tell the people what they should give as dues, and one of them I was quite surprised how high it was. But just so you have a feel for what we take in as dues, so far in 2023, and that doesn't include all the generous people that gave me envelopes today, but so far we have received dues from 6 people, and it's a total of $688. So you can see that that averages out to approximately $100 per person. I can take your checks today, or you can mail them to my home. It's the address that's been in the book for the last 15 years. And when you make out the check, make it out to UMW, not the United Women in Faith. We have not legally changed our checking account, so that's how it has to be done. Does anybody have any questions about the finances in the Treasury? Yes. Okay, the question was, or the comment was that they think the honorarium should be raised from $50 to $75. And that, to me, that sounds like a good idea. I think the board would probably talk about that. One of the reasons I think it's good is because most of our speakers are from charitable organizations or religion-based organizations, and most of them have said to me I'm giving the money to the organization. Who was the woman that spoke at the last general meeting? A man and a woman. What was their organization? Night Angels? Yeah, I had made the check out to her, and she said, oh, it should have been made out to Night Angels. And I said, well, you can just go ahead and give it to them. So usually the money does go to the organization, But when we've had a speaker that's come a ways and may not have been associated with an organization, it's really nice for them to have the money for travel expenses. Any other comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion, Suzanne. We'll discuss it at our board meeting, like Barb said. And Carolyn Wick, anything social action?
I'm sure it won't surprise you to know that that I'm most concerned as far as social action is concerned with this latest shooting at State, and thinking about. I noticed that Bev has Advocacy Day for gun control information on the list here, and I think that that's very important. I wonder. Now, Melanie said, she pointed out to something, and she said, send letters. And a lot of times we think an individual letter, what good is that? But if you think about, remember the song, If Everyone Lights Just One Little Candle, what a great world this would be. Well, I think that we can do the same thing with letters to our Congress people, our senators, and let them know that, we're really concerned. There was another memorial recently for those of Japanese descent, who had been in the I almost like concentration camps, right? But the camps that they set up for them during World War II. And it made me feel that we don't pay enough attention probably to the fact that there is a lot of hate against Asian Americans even today. And we have to be aware of that and help them to feel that they're a part of us. So those were a couple of things that I'd been thinking about social action wise. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Those were good suggestions. So there's an Advocacy Day for gun control in Lansing on March 22nd, and it was planned months ago before the shooting at MSU. So it just happened to be a relevant time to have it. March 22nd in Lansing, 8 to 3. It's an all-day thing. I plan on going. I am going. I registered, and I think my husband, Tim, is going. We had sort of an informational meeting, which they had to change because the shooting was the day before the meeting they had last Tuesday. But there's 3 trainings coming up by Zoom if you want to speak with legislators while you're there. We have appointments are scheduled. I've never done this before. You don't have to go to speak with the legislators, but you would be in a group, so you could just go for the experience as well to learn how to be less anxious about it. That's what I'm doing. And Michelle, my daughter Michelle, is on the community organizing team that's organizing this. It's going to be a day of prayer and gatherings and discussions, and then of course the appointments with the legislators. So if you want more information or want to see me about going, just text me, email me, call me, catch me at church. And I'll be glad to help you with that. And next meeting of Lydia Circle, I don't think we set a date for that. Oh, it's St. Patrick's Day, March 17th? Okay, March 17th. Whose house? Barb's house? I don't know where I was when we were talking about that. Pardon? Yes, I was wearing my crown and looking at my starward and stuff like that. Okay, so Barb said she's doing a program on sowing seeds, and there'll be a craft involved with making a mosaic. So that should be really fun and interesting. And we're still discussing meeting during the daytime for Lydia's Circle once in a while or every other time, and that's probably not going to happen till fall, but it is still under discussion. And I think that's it. Does anyone else have something I missed? Okay, so let's say the mitzvah prayer that we end with. Yeah, Karen? Oh, there's some refreshments in the Markham room right to the back of the church there. So if you're able, we can stand and say this. You can join hands if you want, if it's convenient. It's a little challenging in the pews to form a circle. Okay. The Lord watch while we are absent one from another. Amen. Thank you for coming.